Hello, my name is Maggie Rose Cunningham. I'm the founder of maggieandrose.com, and today I'm coming to talk to you about bright staves and Murk staves. So this is a question that came courtesy of Jean. Thank you very much, Jean. Jean noticed that in Middle Earth readings, sometimes people will come and they will say, "Oh, I got the Feiyu rune, but it was upside down or it was on its side," and that changes the nuances of the reading of the meanings that we can then gather from the rune and how it wants to partner with us. And so she asked, what's happening here? So I call this Murk staves and bright staves because I quite like the wording, but sometimes they're also called a rune being well aspected or ill aspected. Sometimes they're called just upright or reversed. Very, very similar language for those of you who do tarot. It's very, very similar to that. So we're going to be exploring that today and looking at that because there are some complexities that take us beyond the way that we would work with our runes for tarot. So I'm going to take you through 5 stages of working with your runes and starting to work with them however they fall. So we're going to start with upright and reversed, as you would expect with a tarot card. So if you get a book on runes, normally that's what they will do, whether they're referring to bright staves or Murk staves. And I should say, by the way, that stave simply means a single rune mark. So you can imagine that bright and Murk, they just sound a bit sexy, don't they? And so we have the upright position. I'm going to use our lovely assistant. Here is the Feiyu rune. So this is the upright position of Feiyu. And then the Murk stave position, or the reverse position, is like that. And what you will find if you look at most rune reading books is that they will say, okay, so if it's this way up, you have access to wealth. No, this is the rune, it means wealth. And if it's this way up, it means you do not have access to wealth. Okay, fair enough. Obviously, as we start to go into this more, we start to get more subtle and nuanced meanings around this. And this is why developing a relationship with your runes is important. So, for example, it's why when I teach Awaken, we look at all of the rune poems, and we discover that in the rune poems, there are both negative and positive connotations embedded in the rune poems. It's not like, oh, this is the proper version of Feiyu, and when it's upside down, it sort of just means the opposite. Our relationship with wealth and our relationship with life force and our relationship with the world, the blood, the body. The original meaning of Feiyu means cattle. So you can think about it like that: access to resource and plenty, health, for example. All of these things come around with Feiyu, but we start off with that what it says on the tin. Wealth is how we start. Access to, not access to. Okay. So then we start to develop our practice as a rune reader, and we say, okay, normally most people, they clock onto this pretty quickly because they say, hold on a second. There are some runes who it doesn't matter whether it is upright, here's the lovely Hagelas to demonstrate, or reversed, because it looks the same, And sometimes these are called non-reversible runes. We've got Isa here as well as a demonstration, the Isa rune, upright, reversed. And some people say, well, that's because, the Hagelas rune, it means the storm. It's going to be a storm regardless. We don't have a well-aspected storm and an ill-aspected storm. I'm going to question that. Isa might be the same. Ice, there's ice, and then there's ice. So we could say, well, they're so straightforward that they don't have any differences. But then you start to get, well, what happens if I get the rune out like this? And this is where we differ from the tarot cards. Because, I'm using my cards, and on Middle Earth readings, I use my cards because you can see them really clearly. Obviously, they're just on red on the plain white square, and you can see which way up they are. But most of us use rune stones, and we can throw them down on our table. And then when we look at them, they could be like any position. So we could get Hagelas like this, and you could argue, well, maybe this is the reverse of the Hagelas rune. Interesting. And the same with Isa. You could say, well, this is, oh, hold on, that's the bright stave. There's the Murk stave lying on its side, depressed and miserable. So we start to question this. And then if we go back to the Feiyu, say, well, hold on a second. If we can do that with Feiyu, if that's upright and that's reversed, then what does it mean when it's on its side? This. It's lying down flat, like this. And this is when we start to get into more subtle meanings behind the runes. So I really like, for example, Freya Aswin in The Leaves of a Drizzle, I want to say, talks about the Feyre rune almost being as like a tree reaching up to the sun, and the Feyre life force becomes the life force, the original life force of the sun. Then we have the roots reaching downwards, not as easy, needing to go down into the dark, harder journey to find that wealth and that life force. You've got here, you might have, I've read this in many different ways before for people, but this might be the question of, you're exhausted, you're literally like lying down, you're reaching up these little grass shoots, but it's hard work. The wind is blowing them there. We can start to see that there. Or again, downwards, you need to reach down into the earth. The time isn't right yet. So you start to get more nuanced readings around each of the runes. And this is where we experiment. And at this stage, this is where I'm doing you a summary right now. In my Awaken to the Runes program, we have a whole module just on bright staves and murk staves. So you can start to say, well, what does this mean? And what's important is recognizing that the runes speak to us. The words runamal means rune speech. And so this isn't so much that we are reading what is, this is the rune and it's a visual. At this point, we are asking them to talk to us, and to speak to our minds. So this is why you must do stage 1. Because if you don't do stage 1, you're going to get confused. Now, for those of you who are already going, oh, hold on, well, she's just done this one and she's done this one, and how's the difference between that and how's the difference between that? That's why. Because we embed these first meanings first. We embed this positive access to life force. It's flowing through me. It's coming easy. And then we say, okay, this one, there are some blockages. Where do we work on the blocks? How do we release that, allow the life force and the wealth to flow once more? Then we start to get into the subtleties. So that comes at stage 2. Then we have what I call stage 3. Now, stage 3 is what I refer to as wonky dog. What happens when it looks like this? What happens when it looks like that? The runes will speak to us once we know them well, however they're falling. And I've got a different assistant to demonstrate this. So here we've got the Perthro rune, rune of mystery, weird life force. And I found with the Perthro rune that when she's like this, call her a she, she's not really a she, they don't really have genders as such. They might have feminine energies. So quite a lot of feminine energy comes out of the Perthro rune. She looks like a cauldron there. She becomes like this. So when she's like this, she might look like a little throne, or she might look like she's some sort of this is the legs of a birthing mother, for example. But when she's wonky donk, as I call it, to me, she looks as if she is tipping. The magical waters of weird are flowing downwards and outwards. It becomes like the cauldron tipping out its magic. Or if it's this way, perhaps it's seeking to catch that substance, that energy. So we start to be able to read them however they move. Now, then we start to get some fun stuff when we move on to stage 4, which is when the runes start to talk to each other. So I want you to imagine that I have just thrown my runes down on a cloth. And what I end up with is my Perthro rune here and my Feyre rune here. Feyre rune, the rune of life force. Maybe there's magic as well as one of the things. Herminia, which is the luck, the force of luck, flowing down out of the Feyre rune, but being caught by the Perthro rune. So there is a question there of saying, okay, you might have a finite amount of energy, you might have a finite amount of Feyre energy. Where are you catching it and storing it? That's what the Perthro rune is offering itself there and saying, look for the unexpected, unanticipated times when the Feyre rune can pour its energy and be caught rather than it being wasted. If it was just down like this, it could be pouring away. It's got a nice container to catch it. That is all to the good. So they start to speak to each other. And then we have stage 5. And stage 5 is when you look at a rune. And I had this last week. I had it with the Ansu's rune, which I don't, it's the Ansu's rune. It was either the Ansu's or Feyre rune. And it was, I was looking, I think it was Ansu's, but it's very similar with the Feyre rune. I was looking at it and I was seeing it as a vehicle moving along. And these were like sticking up barbs in the path, stopping it from moving. So it was a really substantive block. And I just had to say something. So I was like, I do not know where this comes from. It is not part of the traditional lore of the rune, but it's coming through so strongly. I've noticed this in all of the cohorts that I've ever taught, particularly the in-person cohorts where people aren't they can't mute themselves. So I can hear them chatting with people when they're doing their case studies and their shares. There are just some people in every cohort who can just read the runes. They just go, oh, this means this. It's really annoying for everybody else because everyone else is like, you haven't learned them. How is it that you can just read them and you just know what it's saying and your reading is so accurate? And that is because they are very, very naturally gifted psychics, and the runes just talk to them. And what I would say with that is that that will take you so far. You know, that's great. It means you're a naturally gifted reader. It probably means, do you need to work with the runes necessarily? Maybe any tool would work for you, but that will only take you so far in terms of the subtleties and the nuances and the energies that the runes offer you. So they are unlikely, for example, to offer you energy healing, transformational work, because they're giving you information. You're receiving, your antennae are out, and they're giving you that information, but you aren't ready to receive them as spirit guides in that sense. So I would always say, for people who are at stage 5, it can feel brilliant. Yeah, it's a great reader. But you need to start at stage 1. You need to learn your runes. And then when they start to speak to you and you get to that stage 5 place, that's great. That's great, because we always have moments when the Nornir come in and they override a little bit and they say, right, yes, this is the traditional meaning of the rune, but this is coming through. And we learn to trust that because we know the runes and we know what this might mean. And normally what happens is that when you speak what's coming through, eventually you realize how it reconnects with the meaning of the rune. So for my person I was doing the reading for, and we had the Ansu's rune and the barbs up in the road. I was looking at what them you need to stop before you reach that place where you're going to get caught. And one of the names for Ansu's is known as the Unfetterer. So it's like, so it's actually taking preemptive action so you don't get fettered, caught, and bound in the first place. So you get back to that knowledge. So 5 stages. Start with stage 1. Start with the rune upright, reverse. I've chosen the Iwas rune there, which is really helpful because it looks the same. You see the same. Let's see if I can find a better one. Upright, reverse. There we go. Upright, reverse with the Algiz rune there. Start with that. Focus on what are the positive connotations for you of that rune and what shadow aspects might it offer. So Algiz, access to guidance, lack of access to guidance. No, straightforward. Then you can start working on the more. What does the Iwas rune mean when it's lying down? Iwas, strength, tenacity, standing, filling in your power, defense. This one might be rigidity, inability to move. It goes too far into the extreme. So you can start to play with those. And then you can move on to the wonky meanings, then move on to how do they start to talk to each other, and then move on to what am I receiving. So that's my little overview of Murk staves and bright staves for you, which I hope you have enjoyed. If you want more, if you have got questions, bring them to Middle Earth readings. I will either endeavour to answer them in Middle Earth readings, or I could do another reading like a video like this. Or obviously, if you are working with a rune and you're working with it as a spirit guide and you need support with that, you can come and book with me 1-to-1 and we can look at what that rune is offering you.